My name is Aaron McCready. I'm 36 years old, and 2 weeks ago I drove back to the hollow where I grew up, a thin ribbon of road pressed between ridgelines in southern West Virginia. It wasn't supposed to be anything dramatic, just a visit before the bank officially sold our family's old place. After my mother passed last winter, it sat empty through spring and summer, and I kept telling myself I'd go down to sort through what was left. I think I knew I was putting it off for reasons that had nothing to do with work or distance. The drive from Charleston takes 3 hours if you know the roads. I hadn't been back in more than a decade, not since the funeral for my father. I told myself the holler wouldn't look the same. That time would have peeled away the sharpness of memory. But the closer I got, the more everything tightened in me. The dark rise of the ridges, the damp smell of leaf mold, the hush that falls once you leave the highway and start winding through switchbacks. There's a way the air changes there. Cooler, heavier, as if the mountains don't like outsiders breathing too loudly. The turnoff to our road still wasn't marked. I recognized it only because of a mailbox leaning at an angle, the same one I used to hit with a stick when I walked home from school. Gravel crackled under the tires as I climbed the last half mile. My old house came into view around a curve. A squat 2-story farmhouse with gray siding and a sloped tin roof that had always rattled in windstorms. I pulled over and just sat there for a while with the engine idling, staring at the place. The yard had gone feral. Goldenrod and milkweed pushed through what used to be my mother's vegetable patch. The porch steps had collapsed at one end, and the swing I built with my dad hung by a single chain. I cut the engine and listened. Just cicadas and the drip of water from the gutter. No voices, no highway hum. When I finally stepped out, my boots sank in soft earth. I expected the smell of rot, but the air carried something cleaner. Rain on tin, wet clay. I circled the truck, grabbed my flashlight and pry bar, and climbed onto the porch. The front door stuck like always. The lock had rusted, so I shoved it open with my shoulder. Inside, the light was gray and muted. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. Wallpaper bubbled at the seams, and a water stain bloomed across the ceiling in the shape of a handprint. My mother's old couch still sat under the front window, the crocheted blanket folded neatly over one arm. That detail got to me. Someone, maybe the neighbor who checked on the place, must have done it. But it looked too deliberate, too much like her way of keeping order no matter what. I walked through each room without turning on a single light. The power had been cut months ago, but even if it hadn't, I doubt I'd have flipped a switch. The place didn't want that kind of brightness. Upstairs smelled of dust and cedar. My bedroom door still had the burn mark from the time I left a lamp too close to the posters. My brother's room was stripped bare, except for a broken dresser. He joined the army when he was 19 and never moved back. We don't talk much now. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me. Not because I believed in anything supernatural. I've never been that type. But because the floorboards always carried sound in strange ways. A draft could mimic movement. The whole house breathed around you, taking small sighs when it cooled at night. As a kid, I used to imagine it had lungs somewhere deep in the walls. I went back downstairs and sat on the couch. My flashlight beam fell across the mantel, where our family photos used to line up. Only one frame remained empty, its glass shattered inward. A spider had spun a web across the corner, threads catching light like cracks of frost. That's when the memories began to edge closer, not in scenes but in flashes. My father's boots by the door, always caked with red mud. The sound of him sharpening his pocketknife at the table. My mother humming under her breath while she kneaded dough. The smell of kerosene when the heater leaked. The night I thought I saw someone standing by the barn, pale against the dark, only to realize it was my own reflection in the kitchen window. That last one came back sharper than I expected. It wasn't the reflection that scared me back then. It was that I couldn't remember moving, couldn't remember standing up to look. One moment I was in bed, the next I was staring out that window, barefoot on the cold floor. My mother found me there near dawn and said, I must have been sleepwalking. For years afterward, she kept a chair, wedged against my bedroom door so I wouldn't wander. I stayed seated for maybe 10 minutes before pulling myself together. The main reason I'd come was to clear out the basement. The rest of the house could crumble for all I cared. But the basement still had boxes of papers and tools my father kept. Stuff the bank would toss once they took possession. The basement door was in the kitchen, half hidden behind the old hutch. I eased it open, and a gust of cold air met me like breath from a cave. The smell hit next: damp soil, rust, faint oil. I aimed the flashlight down the stairs. The beam cut through dust motes, landing on the concrete floor below. Everything looked untouched. The old workbench, a few shelves lined with mason jars, a coil of extension cord hanging from a nail. Halfway down, the step under me groaned. I remembered that sound. My father used to say it was the house's warning not to go poking where I didn't belong. When my boots hit the floor, I realized how quiet it was. Upstairs, the house had creaked and whispered, but down here everything pressed inward, muffled. My light swung across the shelves until it landed on something draped in a tarp in the corner. I knew that shape immediately. My father's table saw. He'd bought it secondhand and made me promise never to touch it. I remember the way it used to whine when he started it up, a sound that filled every room and made my mother shout that it was too late at night for carpentry. I peeled the tarp back. The metal was flaked with rust, but the blade still caught light. For some reason, that shimmer hit me hard. My chest tightened. That's where he'd sliced his hand the summer before he died. I hadn't thought about it in years, but the memory returned clean as a photograph. Him holding his palm over the sink, blood spattering the white porcelain, saying it was just a nick. He'd wrapped it himself with duct tape and a rag. The wound festered after that, turned gray around the edges. My mother begged him to go to the hospital, but he wouldn't. He said folks around here healed fine on their own. 2 weeks later, he collapsed in the yard. Sepsis, they said. I was 17. I remember thinking at the time that he looked almost relieved. I sat on the workbench stool and turned off the flashlight for a minute. The dark was thick but not total. Thin ribbons of daylight leaked through the tiny window near the ceiling. My eyes adjusted, and the basement began to take shape again. The cold worked its way up through the soles of my boots. That was when I heard it. A single knock, faint but distinct, coming from the floorboards above. Then silence. I froze, counting heartbeats. Another knock followed, slower, like someone dragging a broom handle. Rationally, I knew it was probably a branch against the siding, or the house settling. But it had rhythm to it. Pause, scrape, pause. I waited it out until the sound faded. When I turned the flashlight back on, its beam caught something wedged between two floor joists overhead, a scrap of cloth. I reached up and tugged it loose. It was an old dish towel, stiff with dust. Someone must have shoved it in there to stop a draft. Still, it unsettled me how tightly it was packed, as if meant to block not air but sound. I finished checking the boxes, labeling a few to load in the truck, and climbed back upstairs. The house seemed smaller now, the ceilings lower. Every doorway framed a piece of my childhood like a diorama, frozen, untouched, but hollowed out. Before leaving, I walked out back to the tree line. The barn leaned to one side, its roof half caved. Kudzu had crawled up the walls, swallowing the old chicken wire. I stood there a while, listening to the creek beyond the property. The water's rhythm was exactly the same as I remembered. Steady, patient. I used to sit by that creek whenever my parents fought, throwing stones until my hands went numb. Standing there, I realized how much of my childhood had been built on silence. Not peace. Just the kind of silence that seeps into you when adults stop talking instead of telling the truth. After my father died, my mother spoke less each year, as if words cost too much. When she passed, I barely cried. The grief had already been spent long ago, scattered like dust through this hollow. I turned back toward the house. In the upstairs window, the curtain shifted slightly. For a moment it looked like someone had brushed it aside. My pulse kicked, but I forced myself to stay put. Wind, I told myself. Nothing more. The trees were swaying, after all. Still, I didn't look away until the fabric settled. The sun was dropping behind the ridge when I climbed into the truck. I told myself I'd drive into town, grab a motel room, and come back in the morning to finish packing. As I rolled down the driveway, the rearview mirror caught one last glimpse of the house. The front door hung open again, though I was certain I'd pulled it shut. I stopped, hand hovering over the gear shift. The breeze moved through the hollow, stirring dead leaves, carrying that damp earth smell I'd grown up with. It was strange how something so familiar could still feel wrong, as if the place itself remembered me too well. I didn't go back to close the door. Not yet. I didn't sleep much that night. The motel was one of those roadside places with buzzing neon that seeps through the curtains. The room smelled faintly of bleach and mildew, the kind of mix that tries to hide what's underneath but doesn't quite manage it. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every sound from the house, the knock from above, the scrape, the curtain shifting. The rational part of me kept filing explanations. Wood contraction, wind pressure, animal movement. But they didn't feel like enough. The noise had carried intention, or at least rhythm, and that made it harder to forget. Sometime near dawn I must have dozed off, because I woke to light cutting under the curtains and the low drone of a semi passing on the highway. My throat was dry. I showered, dressed, and checked out by 7. The woman at the front desk asked if I was the one fixing up the McCready place. I told her no, just cleaning it out before the sale. She said, "That house always did make folks uneasy," then smiled in a way that said she didn't want to explain why. The drive back into the hollow felt different in morning light. The ridges looked softer, green bleeding into mist. I stopped once by the old church near the fork in the road. The graveyard behind it had filled in since I left. The McCready plot sat near the edge under a leaning cedar. My father's stone was cracked down the center, Frost damage, probably. My mother's was still clean, the date only a few months old. Someone had left a single plastic rose tucked in the grass. I didn't touch it. By the time I reached the house, sunlight had already burned off the dew. The front door was still hanging open. That detail stopped me cold. It hadn't blown shut overnight, which would have been the natural thing. It just sat there, yawning wide like the place had been waiting. I parked, left the engine running for a moment, then forced myself out. The porch boards gave under my weight. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it: dust, silence, that folded blanket on the couch. Only one thing had changed. The empty frame on the mantel now lay face down on the floor. Maybe vibration from wind had knocked it over. Maybe not. I set it back upright and told myself to focus. I had a full day's work ahead. Load the boxes from the basement, clear out the kitchen cabinets, lock up. I didn't plan to stay another night. The first few hours went fine. I worked systematically, stacking boxes near the front door, sweeping cobwebs from the corners. The monotony helped steady me, but the quiet wore thin. Around noon, I made the mistake of turning on my phone's voice recorder, thinking I'd document what I was keeping versus tossing. When I played it back an hour later, there was a stretch, about 15 seconds, of static between notes. No sound from me, no movement, just static. And underneath it, something faint that could have been a breath or a sigh. I deleted the file immediately, told myself it was interference. Still, I stopped recording after that. At some point I opened the kitchen window to let in air. The hinges squealed. Outside, the yard shimmered with heat. I thought about how small it looked now. As a kid, the hollow had felt endless. The woods like another world. I used to dig near the fence line for arrowheads. Sometimes I'd find rusted nails instead, bits of barbed wire. I'd line them up on the porch rail like trophies. My father would laugh, call them mountain relics. He was never unkind, just distant. The kind of man who spoke more to his tools than his sons. I paused by the sink and caught sight of my reflection in the window. For a split second it startled me. Not because it looked strange, but because it looked young. The light hit my face in the same angle it used to when I was 12 washing out the lines. I blinked and it was gone. Just me again, older, tired. That was when I noticed the cellar door, at the edge of the yard, half sunk into the ground beside the barn. We never used it much when I was growing up. It led to a small storm shelter built into the slope, more like a root cellar than anything else. My father had kept canned goods there in case of bad weather. I remembered the feel of the latch, always cold metal even in summer. The thought of it bothered me all at once. Yesterday I hadn't even thought to check it. I couldn't remember the last time it had been opened. Curiosity tugged at me. Maybe part of me wanted proof there was nothing to fear, just old dirt and jars. So I grabbed my flashlight again and headed across the yard. The grass brushed against my jeans, damp at the knees. A pair of blackbirds burst from the barn rafters as I passed, their wings thudding against air. The cellar door was exactly as I pictured. 2 heavy wood panels joined by a rusted hinge, padlock dangling uselessly. I knelt and tried to lift one side. It resisted, then groaned open with a long exhale of trapped air. The smell hit first. Mold iron, something like old potatoes. The steps were stone, slick with moss. I aimed the light downward and saw shelves lined with jars, most cloudy from age. Some still had labels in my mother's handwriting: Eckled Beans 1998, Apple Butter 2002. I should have felt nostalgia. Instead, unease slid in, subtle but steady. At the far end of the small room, a wooden chair sat facing the wall. The backrest had been repaired with wire, same way my father used to fix things. A folded blanket rested on the seat. My flashlight trembled slightly in my grip. None of this was new. Nothing sinister about a chair. But the arrangement felt staged, deliberate. I walked closer. The blanket wasn't dusty like everything else. Its color, pale blue, stood out against the damp stone. When I touched it, the fabric left a dry patch on my fingertips, as if it had been stored somewhere clean until recently. That realization crawled under my skin. I backed away slowly, making sure not to turn my back to the space. My pulse had kicked up, though I couldn't say why. There was no evidence anyone had been there. No footprints in the dirt, no fresh candle stubs, nothing. But I couldn't shake the image of someone sitting in that chair, facing the wall for hours, days, maybe waiting for something. Back outside. Sunlight washed over me, but it didn't feel like relief. I pulled the cellar doors shut and dropped the padlock back into place. My hands were trembling now, so I went to the truck, sat inside, and forced myself to breathe. I checked the time, just after 2. The air was thick enough to taste. I considered driving off right then. Leave the rest, let the bank handle it. But logic argued louder. If I didn't finish today, I'd have to come back again. I couldn't bear that idea. So I grabbed a bottle of water, splashed my face, and went back inside. The afternoon dragged. Heat gathered under the tin roof, turning the upstairs into an oven. By 5, I'd packed the last of the papers and tools. Only one box remained in the basement, the one marked Dad's things. I saved it for last out of habit. When I pried it open, the smell of motor oil and tobacco drifted. Inside were his old cap, a few photographs, and a notebook wrapped in butcher paper. The notebook surprised me. My father wasn't one for writing. The cover was cracked leather, corners rounded from use. I opened to the first page. Most entries were just lists, supply notes, repair dates, a few grocery reminders. But near the middle, his handwriting changed. Slanted, hurried. March 3, 2005. Noise again under floor. Thought it was pipes. Not pipes. Waited up last night. Heard it near the cellar. Don't tell the boys. She says it's just the house settling. Not sure anymore. I kept reading. The entries stayed short, scattered across weeks. Each mentioned sound, movement, the word settling, in quotation marks. The last one dated 2 weeks before his death. Reed can't sleep. Keeps knocking. 3 times, always 3. Buried it once, thought that was enough. I read that line 5 times, trying to parse it. Buried what? My first instinct was that he meant an animal. Maybe a raccoon under the foundation. But the phrasing, thought that was enough. Had weight to it, like he'd tried to solve something deeper. A headache began to pulse behind my eyes. I closed the notebook, wrapped it back in paper, and carried it upstairs. Whatever my father meant, it was long past relevance. He'd been sick before he died, fevered and paranoid. That's what I told myself. Still, I caught myself glancing at the ceiling half, expecting to hear the same rhythm of knocks. When I stepped outside, dusk was settling between the ridges. The sky had gone, that deep bruised color that comes right before dark. I loaded the boxes into the truck bed one by one. Crickets had started up in the grass, loud and overlapping. As I went to close the tailgate, a sharp sound cut through the air. 3 distinct knocks from somewhere inside the house. I froze, hand on the latch. My first thought was a tree branch, then maybe a loose shutter. But the timing, the exact 3 beats, hit too close to the words I'd just read. I forced myself to look back at the house. Every window glared with reflection, orange from the setting sun. Nothing moved. No shadows. No wind. Just that lingering vibration in my chest, as if the hollow itself had echoed the sound. I didn't go back inside. I told myself it was over for the day. I climbed into the truck, turned the key, and drove down the gravel road without looking once in the mirrors. But even as the house disappeared behind trees, the sound seemed to follow. 3 slow knocks, fading but precise, somewhere under the noise of the tires. I didn't go straight back to Charleston. I stopped 20 miles out, in a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Plastic booths, coffee thick enough to chew. 2 locals arguing quietly about high school football. My hands still shook when I wrapped them around the mug. The heat helped a little. I kept watching the window, half expecting headlights from the hollow to appear, though I knew no one followed me. I told myself the knocks were just stress, nothing more. I'd been up since dawn, barely eaten, steeped in memories that weren't kind. Our family's history in that place was enough to make anyone hear ghosts where there weren't any. Still, I couldn't forget the timing. 3 knocks, exactly like my father's note. That precision didn't feel random. By the time I checked into the same motel, the one by the highway, night had fallen. I left the boxes in the truck and took only the notebook inside. The clerk didn't recognize me. Good. I didn't want conversation. I set the notebook on the small table by the lamp, sat down on the edge of the bed, and stared at it like it might move. When I finally opened it again, I read every page, this time slowly. The early entries painted a picture I'd forgotten. Small repairs, mentions of the barn roof, the way he complained about the creek flooding every spring. But the later ones told a different story, something brittle. April 10. Dogs won't go near the cellar. Smelled soil turned over again. Don't remember doing it. April 14. Heard whispering under floor. Thought it was wind through vent, but it said my name. April 16. Told her not to use the back door at night. It opens itself now. That last line stopped me cold. I read it twice, then 3 times. My father wasn't poetic or imaginative. He wrote the way he talked. Plain, exact. For him to describe a door opening itself meant he'd truly seen something happen, or thought he did. The last entry, dated May 1, was barely legible. Put it back. Can't keep it quiet otherwise. Then nothing. The next page was blank. I sat there with the book open on my lap, feeling the hum of the motel refrigerator, the distant hiss of passing cars. I wanted to believe he'd been delirious from infection, that the fever had scrambled his sense of time. But some part of me, the same part that had heard those knocks, kept circling back. I decided I'd go back one last time in the morning. Get closure, I told myself. Maybe find whatever he'd buried, if only to prove it was something ordinary. There were no monsters in our hollow, just generations of stubborn men and bad luck. Sleep came late, thin and restless. I dreamed of the creek behind the house. The water ran backward, pulling leaves upstream. Something pale moved beneath the surface, the shape of a hand reaching up, fingers flexing in slow current. When I jerked awake, the clock read 3:17 a.m. My throat was dry to sand. I didn't try to sleep again. At dawn I packed, checked out, and drove toward the hollow with the notebook on the passenger seat. Fog clung low in the valleys, curling around treetops like smoke. The closer I got, the stronger the sense of inevitability grew. It wasn't dread exactly, more like gravity. The house appeared around the bend, pale in the morning mist. The door still gaped open. I left the truck idling while I gathered the courage to step out. The silence there was thick, unbroken even by birds. That's when I realized what was missing: the creek sound. I couldn't hear it. The same steady rush that had filled every night of my childhood was gone. That absence felt wrong in a way I can't explain. I walked down the slope toward the waterline, half expecting to find a dam of debris. But the creek was still there, narrower than I remembered, its surface flat and still as glass, not flowing, just waiting. The air smelled metallic. When I crouched by the bank, I saw the faint reflection of the house, distorted by thin movement beneath the surface, as if something large had just sunk out of sight. My skin prickled. I stepped back and returned to the yard. I told myself to focus on the rational, find whatever my father might have buried, close things up, leave. His notes mentioned the cellar. Put it back, he'd written. So that's where I went. The padlock still hung on the latch. I twisted it off easily. Inside, the air felt heavier than yesterday. The smell was sharper, like wet iron and earth. The chair was still there, facing the wall, the blue blanket folded neatly on the seat. My flashlight beam wavered across the dirt floor until it caught a small, irregular mound near the far corner. I approached slowly. The mound wasn't large, maybe 2 feet wide, a shallow hump of darker soil. Someone had dug there recently, or at least within the past few years. The dirt looked disturbed, looser than the rest. My pulse drummed in my ears. I told myself it was probably an animal my father had buried, or trash he'd hidden to keep the yard tidy. But curiosity pressed harder than fear. I found an old spade leaning by the stairs and started to dig. The soil gave easily, clumps crumbling apart. After the first foot, the smell deepened. Earth mixed with something sore. The blade struck metal. I froze, then crouched and cleared the dirt with my hands. It was a small tin box, rusted shut, the kind people used for recipes or old photos. I hauled it out and brushed it off. The lid creaked when I pried it open. Inside were several things: a length of red string coiled tight, a child's marble, a tooth, human by the look of it, and a folded scrap of paper. My stomach turned. I opened the note carefully. 3 knocks. Don't answer. Don't listen. Cover the hole. No signature, no date. I sat back on my heels, heart hammering. The rational explanations, ritual, superstition, fevered mind, fought for footing. But the precision of those words, the echo of what I'd heard, was too clean to ignore. My father had written this, buried it, and died weeks later. I should have stopped there. Should have left the box, covered it, walked away. Instead, I kept staring at the dirt beneath it, wondering if there was more. I dug deeper. Another 6 inches down, the soil turned darker, denser. Then the spade hit something that gave slightly, like fabric. My breath caught. I crouched, brushed away the dirt. What I saw wasn't bone. It was cloth, coarse burlap. The smell rising from it made my stomach twist. Not fresh decay, but old, sealed rot. I staggered back, dropping the spade. The air felt too tight to breathe. Whatever lay there had been buried long enough to fuse with the earth. My mind leapt to the worst conclusions, but none made sense. There had never been missing people here. No whispers in town. No reason to think my father. No, he wouldn't have. I forced myself to back out of the cellar, one step at a time. Sunlight hit me like water when I reached the yard. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the flashlight. I wanted to run, but a kind of stubbornness rooted me. I needed to understand. I called my brother. He answered on the third ring. Voice groggy from whatever base he was stationed at now. I told him I'd found Dad's notebook, that there were things in the cellar. He was silent for a while before saying, "Aaron, just call the sheriff. Don't go digging up ghosts. You know how he got near the end. I'm telling you, something is down there. Then let someone else deal with it." His voice carried that same mix of pity and irritation he used at our father's funeral. I didn't argue. I said I'd think about it, hung up, and sat on the porch steps. The sun had burned away the fog completely, but the hollow stayed dim, the ridges casting long shadows over the yard. The creek still hadn't resumed its sound. I kept listening for it, wanting that noise back, the ordinary rhythm that would make everything make sense again. Then, from somewhere beneath the floorboards of the house, came a single knock, slow, heavy, followed by another, and another. 3. The sound wasn't muffled this time. It traveled clean through the wood, through the air, through me. My breath hitched. I stood, staring at the doorway, every nerve awake. I told myself it could be an animal under the foundation. Could be a pipe, even though there was no running water left. I forced logic between me and fear. But logic didn't explain why the knocks had stopped exactly at 3 again. I stepped inside. The house was still. Dust floated in the slant of light. My heartbeat sounded too loud in my ears. I walked to the kitchen, then to the basement door. My hand hovered on the knob. From the other side came one last sound. Not a knock this time, but something dragging slowly across concrete, followed by the faintest breath, like soil shifting. I backed away, closed the door, and leaned against the wall until my knees stopped shaking. Then I did what my father's note said. I went back outside, grabbed a sheet of plywood from the barn, and nailed it over the cellar doors. When it was done, I stood there listening. The hollow was silent again, and this time the silence felt earned, like something had finally settled. I didn't go back inside after that. I locked the front door, even though it meant nothing, and drove until the road opened into daylight. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, where the air felt normal again, light, forgetful. In the rearview, the ridges closed behind me, sealing the hollow away. But the sound of those 3 knocks stayed with me, a rhythm you can't unhear once you've known it. Back in Charleston, I tried to fit the hollow back into its box. The way you tuck a bad dream into the corner of your mind and tell yourself it was only a story. I went back to work at the surveying office, buried in plats and elevation maps. I told no one about what I'd found, not the note, not the box, not the cloth beneath the soil. I kept meaning to call the county sheriff, but every time I started to dial, I'd hear the dull rhythm of those 3 knocks, somewhere in memory, and hang up. The days blurred together. I slept poorly. Every night the house noises, plumbing, neighbors' wind, slid into that same measured cadence, 1, 2, 3. It was never loud, but always there, hiding under the rest of the world's sounds. After a week, the bank called to confirm the final inspection for my mother's property. They planned to send a contractor up to secure it before sale. I told them it was fine, that the place was clear. But later that night, guilt caught up with me. The idea of someone else going down into that cellar without knowing. It felt wrong. Dangerous, even if the danger wasn't physical. I convinced myself the right thing was to return once more. To see it sealed properly. To make sure nothing remained exposed. Closure. I told myself again. Always closure. The next morning I called off work and drove south. It was mid-September now. The trees beginning to show rust along the edges. The drive felt shorter than before, like the hollow was pulling me in. The air thickened as the road narrowed. By noon I reached the turnoff. A white truck was already parked outside the house. Logo of the county utilities department on the door. A man in coveralls knelt near the porch, fiddling with the meter. When he saw me, he stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "You the owner? Family property," I said. "I'm just checking on it before it's sold." He nodded toward the house. Thought it was empty. Gate was open, so I came to read the old lines before they shut it off for good. "Anyone else been here?" "Not since I pulled up," he said. Then, after a pause, heard something from the basement earlier. Probably a raccoon or pipes knocking. The way he said knocking made the back of my neck prickle. I thanked him, waited until he packed up and left, then stood alone beside the truck. The house looked different this time, almost expectant. The open door darker than it should have been against the afternoon light. The plywood over the cellar doors was still nailed tight. Good. I told myself I'd just double-check, maybe pour some quick, set concrete around the edges to keep it sealed. Simple task. Nothing more. Inside, the air was cooler, carrying that familiar mineral damp. Dust motes danced through the slanted light. Everything sat as I'd left it couch. Blanket, frame, silence. Yet the house felt rearranged somehow. Not in furniture, but in balance. The walls leaned differently, as if listening. I walked through each room methodically, forcing calm. When I reached the kitchen, I noticed something on the floorboards. Small dark stains, scattered in a trail from the back door to the cellar entrance. I knelt and touched one. It was tacky, faintly reddish-brown. Rust, maybe, or something older. The cellar door itself was shut tight. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No movement, no sound. My pulse slowed. Maybe it really had just been animals before, nesting somewhere in the foundation. I went out back to mix the concrete. The bucket and trowel came from the barn, where the smell of old hay lingered. I poured water from a jug, stirred until the powder turned thick and gray. While I worked, the quiet pressed down. No wind, no crickets. Even the creek stayed mute. When the mix was ready, I knelt to pour a thin layer around the seam of the cellar doors, smoothing it with the trowel. My hands found rhythm in the motion. Slow, steady strokes. I almost didn't notice when the ground beneath me vibrated. It wasn't strong, just a faint tremor. Then, faintly from below, came a single knock. The trowel paused mid-air. Another knock. Then another. 3. I sat back hard. Heart thudding. The sound had come from directly under the doors, not deep, but close. As if someone stood right beneath them, palm to wood. For a long moment I didn't move. Sweat trickled down my spine despite the cool air. Logic scrambled for explanations, air pockets shifting, soil settling under the concrete. Coincidence. But the rhythm was too exact, too practiced. I forced myself to speak, just to hear something human. "No one's down there?" I said out loud. My voice cracked. "There's no one left." The silence that followed felt almost like an answer. I packed up the tools, sealed the rest of the seam, and stood. My hands trembled enough to smear the wet concrete. When I looked down, faint impressions, like small round dents, had appeared in the surface. 3 of them, side by side, perfectly spaced. I blinked hard, thinking I'd pressed the handle accidentally. But when I touched them, they were smooth, too deliberate. The light shifted behind me. Clouds had rolled over the ridge, dimming the yard. I finished fast, covered the bucket, and went inside to wash up. The tap still ran from the old well pump. The water came out cold and brown at first, then cleared. I cupped it to my face. Something in the reflection caught my eye. In the window pane above the sink, my own face looked back. But the background didn't match. Instead of the kitchen wall, it showed the cellar steps falling into dark. My breath stilled. I turned around. The basement door was still closed. When I looked back, the reflection had corrected itself. Just me, pale and sweating. That was when I realized I couldn't stay another minute. Whatever lay in that soil, whatever rhythm haunted those boards, it wasn't mine to mend. I grabbed the notebook from my pack, the one I'd kept locked in the glove compartment, and set it on the counter. Then I tore out the page with my father's final words. Put it back. Can't keep it quiet otherwise. And left it there. Let the next owner see, or the bank, or whoever came after. Outside, the clouds thickened, a storm gathering somewhere beyond the ridge. I started the truck, gravel spraying under the tires. As I reached the end of the drive, movement flickered in my side mirror. A brief shape crossing the yard, low to the ground like a person crawling. I braked hard, turned. Nothing. Just tall weeds rippling under the wind. I told myself it was an animal again. Had to be. I drove on, hands locked tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road. Half a mile down, I heard it. 3 muffled knocks. Not from the house this time, but from inside the truck bed. I slammed the brakes. The sound stopped instantly. The road behind me was empty. My heart hammered so loud I could barely hear over it. I stepped out slowly, walked to the back, lifted the tailgate. Nothing. Just the empty bed, scattered dust, a few pebbles. But in the thin layer of grit coating the metal, I saw 3 small circular marks pressed into the surface, almost like fingertips. I shut the tailgate carefully and got back in. I didn't drive fast. I just kept going, steady, until the road widened and cell service returned. I called my brother again. He answered on the first ring this time. "Aaron, I sealed it," I said. My voice sounded distant in my own ears. "The cellar. You were right. I shouldn't have gone back." He was silent for a few seconds. "Then, you sound awful. I just need sleep." "Sell it. Forget it, move on. That place was never good for us." "I know." We hung up. I tossed the phone on the passenger seat and drove until the ridges fell behind the horizon. That night, back in my apartment, the air felt too still. I opened all the windows, letting in the noise of the city. The hum, the horns, the living world. For a while it helped. Then, near midnight, someone knocked at my door. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. I froze on the couch, every muscle wired tight. I waited, listening for footsteps, a voice, anything. Nothing followed. After a minute, I forced myself to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I stayed there a long time, hand on the deadbolt, trying to decide if I'd really heard it, or if memory had just replayed itself. The silence on the other side felt thick, patient. I didn't open the door. Eventually, I sat back down, lights still on. Sleep didn't come. Somewhere between minutes, the city noise thinned. and I caught the faintest echo again, not from the floor, but from inside the walls. 3 quiet knocks. Measured. Familiar. Like something that had followed me home. For a week I convinced myself I was imagining it. That the knocks were nothing more than the afterimage of noise. Phantom rhythm left over from the hollow. My mind tracing the outline of fear long after the sound was gone. It's strange what you can normalize when you need to keep functioning. You file the unease away, keep the lights on, stay moving. The city hum covers a lot, but patterns always rise. The knocks returned every night, always between midnight and 1, always 3 in a row. At first they came from the walls, then from somewhere under the floor. My apartment sits on the 2nd level of an old building downtown. No crawl space, no basement, just concrete and plumbing. I tried to reason it out, pipes expanding, neighboring tenants, heat vents. The mind can explain anything if you give it enough daylight. Still, it felt personal, like the sound had memorized me. I started staying out later. Dinners with coworkers, long drives with no destination. The more I avoided the apartment, the more I dreamed about the house. I'd see it in fragments. The porch swing creaking, the cellar doors breathing open, my father's boots by the threshold. In one dream, he stood knee deep in the creek, holding the tin box. His face was gray, expressionless, and when he opened his mouth, the sound wasn't speech but those 3 knocks, one after another, hollow as drum beats. I woke up one night with my heart racing and found myself standing by the window barefoot. Same as when I was a child. The city below was quiet. I stared at my reflection in the glass, half expecting it to move out of sync. It didn't, but the thought alone was enough. That morning, I called my brother again. He didn't answer, so I left a message. Something short, practical. We should talk about the house. I think there's more to what Dad wrote. I didn't mention the knocks. Didn't mention that I hadn't slept properly in days. Work started to slip. I forgot field equipment, misread coordinates. My supervisor, a patient man named Keener, pulled me aside after a survey run. "You all right, Aaron? You look like you've been living underground. Just tired." He studied me for a moment. "Go easy. This job's hard enough without ghosts." He meant it as a joke, but I felt my stomach twist. That night, I left the office late. Rain tapping against the windshield. And for a few seconds I considered driving back to the hollow again. The pull hadn't faded. It felt stronger. Like a tether through the mountains humming faintly under my ribs. Instead, I turned toward the edge of the city, where the river cuts through old industrial lots. I parked by the water, shut off the engine, and sat there listening to rain hit the roof. The steady rhythm soothed me, almost enough to forget. Almost. Then, beneath the rain, a different rhythm joined. 3 dull taps against the truck's rear window. My stomach dropped. I didn't turn around right away. I just stared at the dashboard, counting breaths. When I finally forced myself to look, the glass was empty except for rain streaks. No one there. But 3 small, round prints trailed through the condensation. I wiped them away with my sleeve and drove home shaking. That was the night I stopped pretending it was nothing. I tore through the boxes I'd brought from the house, searching for the notebook. I'd thought I'd left it on the counter in the kitchen, but it wasn't there. Yet somehow, it was now sitting in the bottom of one of the moving boxes under a pile of papers, wrapped in the same butcher paper. I didn't remember packing it. The cover was damp, edges warped slightly. When I opened it, new handwriting filled the last pages. Not my father's. Too thin, slanted, uncertain. It took me a few seconds to recognize it as my own. September 18. Heard it again under floor. Thought it was gone. Not gone. September 20. 3 knocks every night. Followed me. Can't sleep. Don't answer. I had no memory of writing those lines. None. I read them over and over, trying to trace when I could have done it. Maybe I'd written them half asleep, some few between dreams and waking. Maybe. The final page was blank except for one line, scrawled across the bottom, the ink still fresh enough to smear beneath my thumb. If you hear it again, dig deeper. I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. Then I closed the book and dropped it on the floor. I didn't want to believe it. But part of me, some dark buried part did. The knocks came again that night, louder. 3, then silence. 3, then silence. The sound felt like it was inside the walls and under my ribs at once. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crouched by the floorboards, pressing my ear to the cold wood. Nothing. Softly, a whisper under the noise of my own pulse, a scraping drag, like something shifting soil. I stood so fast the flashlight rolled away. The walls seemed to pulse with it now, slow and steady. I told myself to leave, go outside, call someone, but I couldn't move, my body locked listening. Then it stopped. Total quiet. I stayed frozen for a long minute before finally managing to breathe. I turned off the light, climbed back into bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next day I called the bank office that handled the sale. I told them I wanted to buy the property outright. The woman on the line sounded surprised. "You mean your mother's old house?" "Yes." I changed my mind. "We've already got an interested party, but nothing's finalized. I can flag your file for review. You'll have to handle the back taxes." "That's fine." When I hung up, my hands were steady for the first time in days. It wasn't courage. It was inevitability. I needed to go back. Whatever this was, it started there, and it would end there. I took the next 2 days off work, packed a shovel, gloves, a generator lamp, and a roll of tarp. The drive down felt like sleepwalking. The mountains rose around me like a mouth closing. By the time I reached the hollow, the light was fading. The house waited the same way it always did. Door slightly open, porch sagging, the yard alive with insects. The plywood over the cellar door still held firm, though hairline cracks had split the concrete seam. I set up the generator lamp near the steps. Its white beam spread across the doors, pale against the creeping dusk. For a moment, I just stood there, shovel in hand, breathing that thick mountain air. Then I started prying up the boards. Each nail screamed as it came loose. Beneath the last board, the smell hit me again. Earth and something metallic. The air rose warm, like a breath exhaled from below. I told myself this was just the final step. Closure. I went down. The cellar looked unchanged. The chair still faced the wall. The dirt floor bore the scar of the hole I'd dug, half filled now by time. I set the lamp down beside it and started digging again. The soil was damp, heavy. Every shuttleful released that scent of rot and iron. I kept waiting to hit the box, but it didn't come. The hole deepened. 2 feet. 3. My arms ached, my shirt clung to my back. Still, something kept me at it. The way you can't stop scratching at an itch you can't see. Finally, the blade struck something solid. I dropped to my knees and brushed the dirt away with my hands. Not metal this time, wood. rough-hewn planks blackened with age. A box, larger than before. I hesitated, staring at it, feeling the weight of air pressing down. Then I pried at the lid with the shovel handle. The wood splintered with a sigh. Inside was nothing, just dark, packed soil. Relief hit so sharp it hurt. I laughed, short, shaky. But then the soil moved. A slow pulse, barely perceptible, like breath under a blanket. I jerked back. The dirt shifted again, rising slightly, as if something underneath was adjusting its weight. I dropped the shovel, stumbled toward the stairs, but the air thickened, pressing against me. A sound bloomed behind. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, from inside the box. I didn't look back. I ran up the steps, slammed the cellar doors, and threw my weight against them until the latch caught. The knocking didn't follow. For a long time I sat there in the grass, gasping, until I realized I was crying. Not from fear exactly, but from recognition. That rhythm, it was mine. I'd been hearing it for weeks. Maybe longer, maybe years. It was as familiar as my own heartbeat. And in that moment, I understood something simple and terrible. Whatever was down there hadn't just followed me home. It had always been home. I don't remember driving back to Charleston. The next clear image I have is of my hands on the steering wheel, dried mud under my nails, the road unspooling ahead like a film I'd already watched too many times. The morning light had a washed outlook, thin and merciless. My clothes smelled like earth and iron. I parked outside my building and sat there until the engine cooled. The world moved on around me. People walking dogs, delivery trucks, a jogger cutting across the intersection. But it all felt like a film running one frame out of sync. I kept seeing that box, the soil inside it breathing. In the shower I scrubbed until my skin burned, but the smell wouldn't leave. It wasn't on me anymore. It was in me, a taste at the back of the throat, metallic and damp. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel the rhythm 3 beats, patient as a pulse. That night I made the mistake of listening. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. But once you start waiting for a sound, silence becomes unbearable. I lay there in the dark, counting seconds. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the radiator, and then faintly under all of it, the knock. 3, deliberate. I didn't move. Just listened. They came again. A few minutes later, closer. The third set sounded as if they came from inside the walls. I sat up, heart hammering, and whispered, "What do you want?" The answer was nothing. Or maybe everything. The next morning, I found dirt on my bedroom floor. A small pile near the foot of the bed, damp smelling of the hollow. My first thought was that I tracked it in myself. My second was that I hadn't been outside in 2 days. I swept it up, threw the dustpan out with the trash. But by evening it was there again. Same spot, a perfect little mound like something had surfaced. That night, I dreamed of digging. The hole in the cellar went deeper than before, opening into a narrow tunnel. I crawled through it, the air wet and thick, until I reached a chamber where water dripped from the ceiling in slow rhythm. 3 drops, pause, 3 more. My father sat in the corner, hands folded, eyes closed. He said nothing, but his chest rose and fell in the same steady pattern. When I woke, my fingernails were packed with soil. Real, not imagined. Dark, damp, still smelling of that place. I stopped sleeping after that. Days blurred. I went through motions, work, food, pretending to talk like a normal person. At night, I stayed awake, waiting. I started hearing the knocks at different hours now. Not just in my apartment, but in elevators, in the office stairwell, through car doors when traffic idled. Always 3, always measured. On the 5th day, a letter arrived. No return address. My name scrawled across the front in handwriting that looked too much like my father's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, blank except for a small circle drawn in pencil and 3 faint indentations beside it. I burned it in the sink. The smoke smelled like wet cedar. By then, I knew I couldn't escape it. Whatever I'd unearthed, or reawakened, had woven itself into me. And yet some stubborn part of me wanted to test it, to see if it was real or madness. So I set up my phone's voice recorder one night and left it running. No more avoidance, no excuses. I went to bed fully clothed, the red recording light blinking on the dresser. I lay there staring at the ceiling until exhaustion won. When I woke, it was dawn. The phone battery was nearly dead. I pressed play. For the first 2 hours, just static and the sound of my breathing. Then, faintly, at 2:43 a.m., 3 knocks. Pause. Another 3. After the second set, a whisper rose under the static. I turned the volume up until it hissed. The voice was low, strained, and it said my name. Once, then again longer, stretched like breath through dirt. I deleted the file. But I kept the phone on me all day, waiting for something else. A call, a text. Nothing came. That evening, the bank called. The sale had fallen through. The buyer pulled out no explanation. The woman on the phone said they'd found moisture damage spreading through the foundation. Maybe a leak under the cellar. I should have felt relief. Instead, the words hit like a pull in my gut. The same gravity that had always drawn me back. By nightfall, I'd made my decision. I packed a flashlight, a camera, and gloves. I told myself this was the last trip. One final look. One record to prove it was all in my head. The drive down felt dreamlike, the air thick with summer's last heat. I reached the hollow just after midnight. The sky was moonless, clouds heavy enough to press against the ridges. The house stood dark and waiting. When I stepped out, the smell hit me full. Earth, iron, and something older. The cellar doors were cracked open. The concrete seams split wide down the center. My work undone. I almost turned back right then. But the knocks started, soft, slow, coming from below the ground. I followed them. The air in the cellar was cold, heavier than before. My breath fogged in the beam of the flashlight. The hole I dug had widened. Edges caved in like something had clawed upward. I crouched at the edge, shining light down. The dirt shimmered, faintly wet, like something breathing under it. I raised the camera and started recording, voice steady. September 29, McCready property. Returning to document. The light flickered. My phone screen blinked twice, then died. The flashlight dimmed to a dull glow. That was when I heard it. Not knocks this time, but movement. Slow dragging, like something shifting just under the soil's skin. The earth pulsed once, then cracked. I stumbled back as a thin plume of dust rose, catching the light like smoke. Beneath it came the sound I'd been waiting for. The sound that wasn't sound at all, but a rhythm inside my chest. 3 beats, faint. Then louder, until it matched my own heartbeat perfectly. For a second, it felt like standing inside myself, echo layered over echo. Then the ground gave. The hole opened wider, dirt collapsing inward, and I fell. It wasn't far, 3, maybe 4 feet, but enough to knock the wind from me. My flashlight landed beside me, beam half buried. I pushed up on my hands and froze. The dirt beneath my palms was warm. Moving, something pressed back against my skin from below. Soft, deliberate, like fingers. I scrambled upright, but the floor shifted, the soil giving way in slow waves. I grabbed the flashlight, aimed it toward the movement. For a fraction of a second, I saw it, the outline of a hand, dark against the lighter soil, reaching upward before sinking again. I clawed my way out of the hole, dragging myself across the floor, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I hit the stairs. Behind me, the earth rippled once more, then went still. Upstairs, the house was silent. No wind, no creaks, nothing. But I could feel it in the air, something new, awake. I stumbled out into the yard, gasping, and looked back. Through the cellar window, a faint light flickered, pale and steady, like a heartbeat in glass. I got in the truck and drove. Didn't stop for gas, didn't look back. It's been 2 days since then. I haven't slept. The knocks don't come from the walls anymore. They come from inside me. Heart, ribs, blood, all keeping time with something that isn't mine. When I close my eyes, I see soil shifting, slow breath under the earth. I tried recording it again, but the mic only captures static. 3 short bursts at regular intervals. I think about my father's last words. Put it back. Can't keep it quiet otherwise. Maybe he wasn't warning anyone. Maybe he was confessing. And now I understand what he meant. Some things, once unearthed, don't stay buried. They wait for whoever digs deepest. I can still feel the hollow calling me, low and patient. I don't know how long I can resist. My pulse keeps sensing to that rhythm, slower each day. When I lie still enough, I can hear it echo faintly under the floor, answering me beat for beat. 3 breaths, 3 heartbeats. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. I stopped pretending I was separate from it, about a week after the last trip. Whatever boundary once existed between me and that hollow, it had dissolved. My heartbeat wasn't my own rhythm anymore. It belonged to something older, deeper. I could feel it even in daylight. Pulsing quietly beneath everything, the hum of traffic, footsteps on the sidewalk, my pulse sensing to an unseen metronome. I quit my job without notice. I think I mumbled something to Keener about family matters, about closing my mother's estate for real this time. He just nodded, relief hidden behind sympathy. He'd seen me unravel for months now. The city no longer felt solid. Every sound carried echoes. 3 knocks hidden under each pattern. The elevator door closing, the click of the kettle. The heartbeat in my ears when I tried to sleep. It all folded into the same rhythm. I started counting time in 3s. 3 steps across the room. 3 spoonfuls of sugar. 3 cigarettes crushed out before I'd even lit one. It felt safer that way, as though following the pattern might keep it from taking over completely. But safety is a temporary lie. On the 10th night, the knocking moved closer again. It wasn't in the walls or under the floor this time. It came from inside the mirror. I was brushing my teeth, head down, when the sound vibrated through the glass. 1, 2, 3. I looked up. My reflection stood perfectly still, but there was dust on its shoulder that wasn't on mine. And behind it, faint but visible, the suggestion of that cellared wall. The same damp stone, the same blue blanket folded on the chair. I turned the mirror to the wall. It didn't help. The next morning, my brother called. I hadn't heard from him since the day I told him I'd sealed the cellar. His voice sounded rough, tired. You still at it? Ate what? Whatever it is you've been chasing. You sound wrong, Aaron. I've had bad dreams lately. The house. Dad, I wanted to tell him not to come back here, to forget the place altogether. but my throat tightened around the words. The thought of someone else stepping into that hollow filled me with something close to jealousy. Like it was mine now, my inheritance, my burden. Instead I said, "It's fine. Just the weather getting to me. Promise me you won't go back." I almost laughed. Sure. He didn't believe me. I could hear it in his breath before he hung up. By then, I knew I would go back. Not because I wanted to. Because it wouldn't stop until I did. Every knock, every reflection, every tremor in my chest pointed in the same direction. The hollow was calling, patient and rhythmic as a tide. I drove down at dusk, the road swallowing me whole. Storm clouds crouched low over the ridges, their bellies pulsing with distant lightning. I passed through towns that looked abandoned, though I knew they weren't. Every house had its windows closed, every porch light off. The rain started 5 miles out, thick drops that hit the windshield like thrown stones. By the time I turned onto the gravel road, visibility was down to a few feet. But I could have found that house blindfolded. The turns lived in my muscles now. When the headlights caught the outline of the porch, my stomach twisted. The front door was open again. Of course it was. The wind shoved it gently back and forth, as though breathing for the house itself. I left the truck idling and stepped out into the rain. The smell hit me first, wet soil and rust. The creek had overflowed its banks, sliding around the edge of the yard. Thunder rolled low, steady, almost timed to that same awful pattern. The plywood over the cellar doors was gone. Not pried off, not broken, just gone. The opening yawned black against the wet ground. I should have run. Instead, I walked toward it, flashlight trembling in my grip. I stopped at the edge, shining light into the dark. The steps below were flooded halfway up, water shining like glass. Each drop of rain that hit the surface made the same soft sound, spaced perfectly apart. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm answered me. Something in me broke then. Not a panic, but a surrender. I climbed down into the water. It was cold enough to bite through my jeans, but I barely felt it. The flashlight beam jittered across the walls, catching the chair still facing the corner, half submerged now. The blue blanket floated beside it, tangled like seaweed. The water rippled as I waded deeper. It reached my waist, then my chest. Beneath the surface, the dirt floor shimmered strangely, as if air pockets pulsed within it. The smell of the place had changed too. Less decay now, more like wet iron and something faintly sweet. I said it out loud, though I'm not sure who I meant to hear. I'm here, I'm listening. The water stilled. Then, from below, 3 vibrations rolled upward through my feet. The flashlight flickered. Its beam swung across the far wall, and for an instant, I saw what looked like writing carved into the stone. 3 short lines stacked above one another. Not words, just marks. I waded closer, running my fingers over them. The grooves were fresh, edges sharp. The ground shifted under me then, subtle, like something turning over in its sleep. The water rippled outward. I stumbled back, splashing against the wall. And then the knocks began again, but not from below this time. From inside me. My chest thudded once, twice, 3 times in perfect rhythm, with the sound rising through the water. I couldn't breathe. The air thickened, my lungs filling with that heavy, damp weight. I dropped the flashlight. It vanished into the dark. I tried to climb the stairs, but the water rose faster than it should have, swirling around my ribs, my throat. Something brushed my leg. Then another touch, higher. Cold fingers, gripping. I kicked free and scrambled upward. slipping on the slick steps until I burst through the opening into rain. I collapsed on the grass, coughing, soaked through. The storm had eased. The rain fell steady, soft now, almost gentle. But beneath it, I could hear that steady rhythm again, muffled through the earth. It wasn't just below the cellar anymore. It was under the entire yard, under the trees, the creek, the ridges. The hollow itself was breathing. I lay there until dawn, too weak to move. When the first light came over the ridge, the rhythm faded. The silence that followed felt enormous, like the pause between heartbeats. I didn't go back inside. I sat on the tailgate of the truck, shaking, watching steam rise off the wet grass. My hands were gray with mud that wouldn't wash off no matter how much rain hit them. The skin along my palms looked cracked, raw, as if something underneath had pressed outward. Eventually, I turned the key and drove until the hollow disappeared behind me. I stopped for gas 2 towns over. The clerk barely looked up when I walked in, just nodded toward the coffee machine. My reflection in the window startled me. My eyes were darker somehow, the pupils wide, swallowing the color. And faintly, against my neck, 3 bruised circles had formed, perfectly spaced like fingertip marks. Back on the road, the radio flickered on by itself. Static first, then a low hum. The rhythm again, faint but steady. I shut it off, but it kept playing, the sound coming from somewhere deeper in the car. I rolled down the window, letting the wind drown it out. By the time I reached Charleston, I felt hollowed out. I should have gone to a hospital, or to my brother, or anywhere with other people. But I didn't. I went home, showered again, sat on the couch, and waited. And that's what I'm doing now. Waiting. Because deep down, I know it's not finished. The hollow is patient. It doesn't rush. It just waits for silence to settle, then fills it with rhythm. I can feel it even as I write this. The knocks are faint again, but closer than before. They're in the walls, the floor, the pulse at my temple. I don't think it ever left the cellar. I think it just needed a way out. And I gave it one. Every sound I make, every heartbeat, is another doorway. If the rhythm finds you, if you hear 3 slow knocks in the night, don't answer. Don't listen. Don't try to bury it. Because once you do, you'll never stop hearing it. And once it remembers your name, it doesn't forget.